Hello everyone, New at Games here with another video on the tutorial series of remaking the core version of Getaway Shootout in Unity. In this video, it's going to be more of an interlude of kind of reflecting on what we have so far built into the game. And so far, we actually have implemented the player movement, we've implemented player power-ups, and also some functionality of the power-ups, such as finding targets. And it's at this point, I think, is a good point to actually reflect that you can actually take this game many different directions from this point onwards. The game that we'll be recreating in this tutorial series is obviously Getaway Shootout, and that is a racing game. So we'll be implementing logic to actually have players race to the finish and all sorts of waypoints and stuff like that. But you could take this game a different direction and make it into kind of a battle game or some other sort of game where you're using these wacky player movement mechanics and you're using power-ups and so forth. So I just wanted to note, yes, you can take it as in any different direction from this point, really. And one thing I want to note, especially in this video, is that I have made a good amount of changes since the last video. I was planning on just making small tweaks, but I kept going on it, and unfortunately I've made a good amount of changes. So I'm going to explain some of the changes I made from the previous videos in this video. And one important thing that I've done is actually implement all the power-ups into the game. So this is all the power-ups now implemented from the original Getaway Shootout game. So all the weapons and teleport gun over there. So it should be all functional. The only thing is the actual graphics of the guns, such as the particle system, is not fully implemented. And this is something that you could do on your own to make it pop out more and to make it more enticing graphics-wise. But for right now, I think in this tutorial series, it's fine that the graphics aren't that good right now. Then the other thing I implemented from the previous videos is actually added some objects into the game, or into this map specifically. And basically all these objects that I added are using the health system. So that means they can take damage, and I've just added simple effects to these objects to kind of display that damage. So if I shoot through this glass here, like this, you can see the glass breaks and kind of has a particle system for that. And then also right here is kind of like an exploding pipe. So if I damage it by shooting it multiple times, the pipe explodes, and yeah, then it has an explosion that can affect the players. So those were kind of small changes that I just added to the game by using the previous health system. And I'll actually go into detail in this video of actually kind of how I set that up. But first, I think I want to jump into kind of the changes I made with the power-ups and how you could implement a power-up yourself, because I did change it up from the previous video a little bit. So let me just jump into that. Let's see. So the biggest change that I've done with the scripts is actually to simplify the scripts more and remove that usable controller class that I created, because it just seemed extra that we really didn't need it. So currently in the game now, it is only just one single usable controller script, and basically all usable scripts just implement this class. And the script is just a simple script that has a method to be implemented, and that's just the use like before. And we also have the cancel use. So any class that wants to be usable, aka a power-up or anything being usable by the player, extends this class, this base abstract class, and implements the use method. And that way they'll manage, or whatever class you make will manage all the sort of ammo or whatever sort of internal details that you have. And so you can have very different usable scripts, and they all just inherit this base usable class. So I think that is just a simpler solution, and that is what I've done in this game so far. So if I jump to like our power-ups here, this is the power-ups in the prefabs folder. These all have scripts that eventually implement the usable base class. So this projectile gun implements the usable class, and so forth. All these implement the usable class to be actually used by the player. And you can look on the GitHub for more details of how I actually implemented it. I tried using the kind of the same idea from that usable controller, but just put it all into one class. So that's kind of the changes I made with the usable class. Now I'll just jump to actually how I made these objects like here to actually have health and to actually have effects that are dependent on the health of the object. So if I click on this exploding pipe, we can see, if I go to the object, we can see it has a health script, which we've done where we made in the previous video. But I added this extra script called health events, which is just a simple script subscribing to these events that we set up, the on damage and on death. And basically these are Unity events, which means I can easily just add new events to this script. And basically all these items in the script or in this list will be executed when this on death occurs. The same thing is for this on damage. Say if I wanted to, I don't know, I'll just drag our own object into it. Say if I wanted to explode every time we damaged, I can just set that up quickly in the Unity editor. So this is using these Unity events, and they're just set up so it's pretty easy to make your own functionality in the Unity editor pretty quick. Everything here, everything in this class right here could be done in an actual Unity script. I could write it line by line, but it's just nice to actually have this kind of drag and drop feature, which allows for quick, simple objects to be made. But if it's a really complex object, I'd recommend actually implementing your own script to actually subscribe to these on damage and on death health events and write the code in the script below. So for this pipe here, it calls these simple kind of commands to actually explode. This was something that I added in from the previous video myself. It's just this new explosive script, which is for all the bombs, the RPG, anything that explodes. And I also just make some small changes. I disabled this sprite, which is the pipe, and then enable the exploding pipe, which is just the pipe after it explodes. So that's just some visual changes. And the same thing is for this glass here. It's same thing, has a health component, and then also has some methods to kind of change and create the particles when it takes the damage. I also added, and I'll hopefully get to it in a future video, I added just a dummy ragdoll up here, and eventually I want it to be holding a gun and actually fire at the player, so I'm just going to leave that for right now. But same thing, it has a health component on it, and has some health events that when it dies, we want to disable certain components on this ragdoll. So that's kind of just how to set up these like health components in the game. Yeah, it's I think a pretty generic system, and I think you can have a lot of different interesting functionality into the game with that. So the next thing I kind of just want to talk about in this interlude is, well, I guess I've already talked about all the changes that I've made. I think actually the last thing I want to do is to actually implement another power-up. So I didn't implement all the power-ups One important one is that medkit in the original Getaway Shootout game. So I'm just going to implement that now so you can actually see that and see kind of just the changes that I've made to this new power-up system. So let's do that right now, is to actually implement that medkit. So yeah, I'm just going to go step by step. So the first thing, like in the previous videos, we have these scriptable objects. So I'm going to create a new scriptable object for this medkit. And that was in this category right there. And I'm just going to call it medkit. And for the icon, I'm going to put the medkit icon. And I don't want it to find a target. And I'll just destroy the medkit right away, since there's no point in keeping it for longer. So that's the whole scriptable object setup, but we still have this power-up object, which is the actual prefab to create in the player's hand. So I'll actually create that right now. I'm just gonna go into our scene and create an empty game object for this. And I'm gonna call it medkit and just reset transform. And we want to actually create a new script to have this whole functionality of increasing the player's health when we use it. So I'm going to jump to our usable scripts folder, and I'm going to create a new usable script. And this way, this will kind of like show you how you can create your own usable script in this system. So I'm going to call it maybe health increase. And this will just be a generic usable object that when you use it, it increases the player's health. So the important thing here is I'm going to make it derived from this usable base class. Again, in the beginning of the video, I was saying any usable object should implement this class. And all you need to do is to implement that one method called use. And this is where you actually implement the functionality of using this usable object. So I'm going to do that here. And all we want to do is increase the player's health. And from this usable class, there is some implementation details that you kind of need to know about. Is I added this who is actually using this. So this is the user. So I want to increase the user's health. So if I go user, this is now our player component that is actually using this object. And then I can actually get the component health and then increase the health. And increase health like that. And this requires amount, so I'm just going to say here to have a variable called amount, and we'll default it to just 100. So when we use this object, it'll increase our health by 100, and I'll cap the health so it won't go over the maximum player health. So I'll just pass that in as true. Now, one thing to note is that this use method is actually, I set it up to return a bool. And this just is to know if this method was successful in using this object. Otherwise, you'll return false if it isn't. So say for some reason, like if there was like some time delay, something like this where it's like it wasn't quick enough or something like that, you could return false and just signal that this usable object wasn't used on that key press. But for this simple class, every time it's good to return true, since there's nothing logic like that was. So this should work as a script now. I can attach it to the component or to that object that I just created, which is the medkit. Oh, don't want to do that. We want to do a health increase and an increase by 100. The other thing I'll add is to actually include a sprite on this game object that will be in the player's hand. And if I go to, let's see, power-ups, and just drag that sprite there, I'll just rename it sprite. So now this power-up object will have the sprite attached to it, so it'll just visually look like there'll be a medkit in the player's hand. And yeah, I think that will be good enough to actually test it in the game. I'm just going to drag it down a little bit so it looks better in the player's hand. And I'm actually going to make this then a prefab. So currently I have all the power-ups in this prefabs folder here. So I'm just going to drag it in with the other ones. And so now we have this object in the prefabs folder. The last thing to do is to link it. And let's see, where is medkit? Right there. So I'm just going to link it by dragging in that new prefab like that. So at this point, the power-up is created. We have a new usable object. And for just testing purposes, I'm just going to come over to this power-up box. I added this override item. So you can easily just, when testing, make it so it spawns a medkit every time. And this way we can easily just test it. So if I go to the medkit, this will work. One thing to note, yeah, it is, I do need to rotate actually the medkit in the player's hand. And that's just rotating the sprite. But one thing to note is that I can use it. So if I press the power up button, I use it, but it stays in our player's hand. And actually I can use it again and again and again and again and again and again. That's because we never called the depleted event. So again, this is kind of something I've changed from the previous video, is whenever the object or the usable object is all finished, you've used all the ammo in the object, or if it's a one-time use, you used it up, you need to call this depleted event, and this will just signal to that player power-up that we're done and it should be cleared. So the last thing to do here is, since it's just a one-time use, is to deplete it after the first use like that. And that's the only other change. I'll actually change that medkit to actually rotate it correctly. So I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees and I don't know, drag it somewhere like that. That should be better in the player's hand. And I'll also change the sorting layer so it's nicely in between the player body and the player arm. So now this should actually be working correctly. I can go grab the medkit, and when I use it, it destroys, and I can go and pick up another power-up. Well, all three medkits respond there. It's cool. And then I can actually damage a player. So if I damage the second player a couple times, and they pick up a medkit, use it, then I can damage them more. So obviously it was working since they didn't die there, but then after that they died. So that's just how to implement simple power-up into the game, kind of the recent changes. I would recommend just checking out the GitHub if you're interested in all the changes I made, because there's just a lot of small tweaks. Because as I said in a previous video, I mean, I'm still learning a lot about Unity and about scripting. So I'm constantly just trying to tweak things to make it a good system for to use in the future. So yeah, there might be plenty of other things that change in future videos. So yeah, like I was saying at the beginning of the video, you can take this at any point and kind of move it into any sort of direction of what game you want to make. Now at this point, the next video is going to be focused on implementing waypoints into the game. And this is specific to kind of the racing game. We'll have waypoints kind of spread across the map, and then the player has to get to each waypoint and then to the final object at the end. So that's what we'll be doing next video, and then we'll continue onwards to get the kind of the core game of the Getaway Shootout implemented. And yeah, we'll go from there. Thank you for watching this video, and see you next time.